Welcome to Parshat Mishpatim. My name is Rami Smith. I'm filling in for David while he's at a conference repping Aleph Beta.
Well, welcome Rami, it's great to have you. Let me catch you up. We're smack in the middle of one of the most exciting stories in the Torah. Last week in Parshat Yitro, we experienced national divine revelation for the first time when we received the 10 Commandments. But before we get to our next big story, the sin of the golden calf, the text takes a major digression. Chapters and chapters of just laws.
And we've had laws before, but never this many and never in one shot. This is almost an entire parsha of laws.
And the laws themselves aren't that exciting. There are intricate laws about damages, judicial systems. Couldn't God have first finished the story and then put the laws maybe in an appendix? Why do we get all these laws? And why here?
Let's explore this together this week on The Parsha Experiment.
Let's bring up our 22nd Parsha recap. We get 3 chapters of laws: criminal law, damages, torts, laws about sexual ethics, social justice, setting up a judicial system, and a few about serving God. God talks about the benefits of keeping these laws. Moses tells the laws to the people who commit to them by famously saying, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will listen and do. Moses, Aaron, and the elders ascend Sinai and see a vision of God. Finally, Moses goes up to the mountain to get the tablets.
So what are all these laws doing here, interrupting our story? We may find the answer by looking at a few of these laws themselves, and as we do, ask yourself, what do these laws remind you of?
We have laws about a person who hits someone and ends up killing him. Makeh ish vamet. There are laws about kidnapping. V'gonev ish umecharo. If one steals a person and then sells him. We learn about umekalel aviv v'imo, one who curses his parents.
Let's stop here. Do these 3 categories of laws together remind you of anything? Laws about killing, stealing, disrespecting one's parents? It's reminiscent of the 10 Commandments. Lo tirtach, don't kill. Lo tignov, don't steal. Kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, respect your parents. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but those are just 3 laws that happen to also be in the 10 Commandments. It doesn't mean there's any real connection.
But we want to suggest that there is, that the 10 Commandments are actually principles, and the laws of Mishpatim are the many applications of those larger principles. The Ramban, Nachmanides, actually suggests that these laws are related to the 10 Commandments, but he doesn't show us how. We want to try to uncover some of those connections.
As we saw, some of these laws fit really obviously into some of the 10 Commandments. Other laws, though, seem to have nothing to do with any of the 10 Commandments. But when we look at the language of those laws, we may start to notice remarkable connections.
Let's take a look. The very first laws in the Parsha have to do with servitude. On the surface, there's nothing in the 10 Commandments that has anything to do with slavery. But take a look at the language. Ki tikneh eved ivri. When you acquire a Hebrew slave, shesh shanim ya'avod. He'll work for you for 6 years. Ubashvi'it yetzeh lachofshi chinam. And in the 7th year, he'll go free. What does that remind you of in the 10 Commandments? Working for 6, stopping to work in the 7th. That's Sabbath, the 4th of the 10 Commandments. Sheshet yamim ta'avod, for 6 days you shall work. V'yom hashvi'i Shabbat la'Hashem Elokecha, and the 7th day shall be a Sabbath to God. Lo ta'aseh kol melacha, you shall not do any work.
By recalling the same language, the Torah seems to be telling us that these laws of servitude are somehow connected to the Sabbath. But how can that be? Of course, servitude has nothing to do with actually keeping the Sabbath, unless there's more to Sabbath than we think.
Laws usually require certain actions. Pay your taxes, stop at a red light. But the laws aren't just about the actions themselves. They're expressions of higher principles. Paying taxes is an expression of a commitment to the larger system we choose to be a part of. It pays for roads, protection, natural parks, and infrastructure that society as a whole benefits from. even if we don't partake in every aspect of it. In our parsha, by connecting certain laws in Mishpatim to the 10 Commandments, perhaps the Torah is teaching exactly this perspective about the purpose of laws. While two laws might not look the same in action, they may be two different expressions of one similar principle.
Why would there be any time limit to how long you can have a servant? Well, when you, the master, are forced to free a servant, it's a reminder that you're not really the master. You don't own the servant. You don't own anything. God is the only master. If that's what the laws of servitude are about, and the laws are connected to the Sabbath, what does that tell us about the underlying values of the Sabbath? When we keep the Sabbath, we testify to the creation of the world. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh. But the laws of servitude show us that this principle goes even deeper. Sabbath is also a reminder that we're not the creators. Throughout the week, we work and we create, and it feels like we're in control. One day a week, we disconnect and reflect on God's creation. We remind ourselves that we're not the masters, that the world doesn't work according to our rules.
Look at what's happening here. It's not only that the laws in Mishpatim are applications of the 10 Commandments, they're actually a commentary on them. The laws add a new level of depth and teach something fundamental about the value that each of the 10 Commandments promotes. Let's take a look at another law in our parsha. Lo tisa shema shav. Do not give a false report about someone in court. Now, if you only look at the concept here, you might say, that fits into the 9th of the 10 Commandments. Lo ta'aneh b'reacha eid shaker. Don't give false testimony. But again, look at the language. It's almost exactly the language used in the 3rd of the 10 Commandments. Lo tisa et shem Hashem Elokecha lashav. Don't take God's name in vain. It feels like these two laws are inescapably related. But how? What does not spreading a false report have to do with using God's name in vain?
What happens when you spread a false report about someone? You're not just giving people false information. You're taking something crucial to one's identity and abusing it. Perhaps that's what's happening in the 3rd commandment too. It's not just about using God's name out of context. Throughout the Torah, God's name is the way in which God relates to us and how we relate to Him. Not taking God's name in vain is about not belittling or devaluing who God is.
Let's look at one more example. In Mishpatim, it says, Kol almana v'yatom lo te'anun. You shall not oppress any widow or orphan. Again, oppression of widows or orphans doesn't seem to be in the 10 Commandments. But what does this language remind you of?
We actually just saw it. The 9th of the 10th commandments is Lo ta'aneh b'reacha eid shaker, which is generally translated as, do not bear false testimony against your friend. That's the same phrase used in our parsha, Kol almana v'yatom lo ta'anun. But what in the world does not mistreating a widow or an orphan have to do with not being a false witness?
In Mishpatim, the phrase lo ta'anun means don't mistreat. If you apply that same definition to the 10 Commandments, lo ta'aneh b'reacha eid shaker doesn't just mean don't bear false testimony against a friend. It means don't mistreat your friend by bearing false testimony.
And that forces us to transform our understanding of this law. Personally, I've always wondered why bearing false witness would make the 10 Commandments. It's important, but it doesn't feel top 10 worthy.
But this may be the answer. Ta'aneh seems to be a word that describes oppression of those with power against the less powerful. Widows and orphans are examples of people who are so often left powerless and alone. The law is about not using your power to exploit those less fortunate. When you testify in court, you're in a position of tremendous power. In a very real way, you can control the fate of the ones about whom you testify, while they themselves can usually do nothing. Again, not only do the laws in Mishpatim recall the 10 Commandments, but they also transform the way we understand their underlying principles.
Now, there are so many laws in this parsha, and we can't explore all of them or show how they all fit into one of the 10 categories, but hopefully these few examples give you a taste of what's going on, and provide a lens that you can use to explore the rest of these laws on your own. Let's return to our earlier question. Why are these laws here, in between the epic stories of Revelation and the Golden Calf?
Last week, in Parshat Yisro, we discussed one aspect of Israel's experience at Sinai. Revelation, direct interaction with God, erased all doubts about whether God was really with Israel, really cared about them. But there's one more important thing that happened at Sinai too. As the people stood at Sinai, God said, "Ve'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh." You, Israel, will be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. They were given a mission to become people who spread God's values to the rest of the world, which is precisely the mission that Abraham was given. But how is Israel supposed to spread God's values? Parshat Mishpatim may be the answer. The people just got the 10 Commandments, and you know why those laws are such a big deal? They aren't just laws, they're moral principles. And the laws in Mishpatim, right after the 10 Commandments, while the people are still at Sinai, are the ways in which we live those larger values in our everyday lives. That's what all laws are really about. They're not oppressive restrictions or annoying rules. They're manifestations of our values. God doesn't want us to just keep a law in the 10 Commandments here and a law in Mishpatim there. It's about recognizing the bridge that ties them together, that principle itself. Laws are God's beautiful way of teaching us how to inculcate moral values within ourselves, in our day-to-day lives.
And that's how Israel is meant to accomplish its mission. God doesn't appear at Sinai and just explicitly tell Israel all of his lofty values. Then they would just remain pie-in-the-sky ideals. Instead, God gives them laws, actionable items that will show them what these values look like and how to acquire them. Israel's job is not just to preach God's values, but to live and model the principles in our everyday lives. And these laws teach us how to do just that.
Join us next week as we tackle the tabernacle on the Parsha Experiment.
Want to watch a revelatory video on this week's Parsha? Rabbi Foreman explores his unique theory that the laws given to us in the Torah are actually based on the stories of our forefathers in Bereshit. The video is linked below. Check it out and let us know what you think.